Hello children, today the topic which I am going to teach you is heredity and evolution. As you already know that there are various life processes which you have read about, there are various life processes which are required for the survival of an individual. What are these life processes? Like nutrition, respiration, transportation and excretion. These are the life processes which are required for the survival of an individual. But there is one more important life process which we have already done, that is reproduction, which we have already read about. What is reproduction? Reproduction is a process by which a living organism can produce the young ones of their own kind. Although this process is not required for the survival of an individual, but this process is required for the continuity of life on earth, or we can say for the continuity of a particular species. Now you know that reproduction is of two types, that is sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. What is the difference between sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction? In sexual reproduction, two parents are involved, that is the male and the female. They produce the germ cells or the gametes. Those are called as the sperm or the ova. And when these two, male and the female gamete, fuse together, they form a zygote, that is which later on becomes the young one. Now, this young one, it is, as we know, that in reproduction we say that organisms produce exact copies, produce their own kind. So if they produce their own kind, how is it possible? What is the mechanism? How they are able to produce their own kind? Even in asexual reproduction, where only one parent is involved, they also produce the young one of their own kind, which is exactly the same copy. Now, how this same kind is produced? How the young one has the similar features of their parents? There will be some mechanism. They have the similarities of their parents. So the topic which today we are going to start with is heredity. Now what is heredity? If we talk about heredity, heredity is basically the transmission of similar characters from parents to offspring. This is heredity, the transmission of similar characters from parents to offsprings. Means we have the similarities which shows the resemblance of the young ones with their parents, whether it is a sexual reproduction or asexual reproduction. But they are not exactly the same copy of their parents. There are some differences also. What are those differences called as? How do these differences arise? How do these similarities come in the young ones? So similarities means heredity and differences in the young ones means variation. So there are two terms, that is heredity and variation. Heredity and variation. Now this heredity and variation, we can see the similarities and the differences in the young ones. Now the question arises, you will be thinking of how these similarities come in the young ones, how these characters are transferred from the parents to the offsprings, how these differences arise in the young ones. So, there was a person who gave answers to these questions with his pioneering work. And who was that person? It was Gregor John Mendel. It was Gregor John Mendel who gave answer to these questions, how the characters are inherited from parents to offsprings, and how the differences arises in the offsprings. Now, Gregor John Mendel, he was a person who worked on this to show how characters are inherited from one generation to another generation. So how did he start it? Before talking about his work, we should know what is heredity and what is variation, which I already discussed with you. Heredity simply means the similarities which are inherited, which are transferred from one generation to another generation, and variation means the differences which arise within the young ones of the same species. Now, the study of this heredity and variation, the study of this heredity and variation is called as genetics. The study of this heredity and variation is called as genetics. The branch of biology which deals with the study of this heredity and variation is called as genetics. And Gregor John Mendel is called as the father of genetics. Gregor John Mendel is called as the father of genetics because he did the experiments where he showed how characters are inherited from parents to offsprings and how the dissimilarities or the variation arise in the young one. Now, before going to how Gregor John Mendel did his experiments, we should be knowing few terms. So you know that heredity, it is the similarity, and variation, it is the difference. Now, how do these variations arise? If we talk about sexual reproduction, you know variations, we have the chances of variation because we have the chances of differences in characters in the young ones because two parents are involved. And number two, there can be a chance separation of chromosomes during gametogenesis. What is gametogenesis? When the gametes are produced. If we talk about gametogenesis, chance separation of chromosomes during gametogenesis. As you have already studied in reproduction, that the reproductive cells or the sex cells, they have only half the number of chromosomes. This means when the gametes are formed, that is the sperm and the ova, they carry only half the number of chromosomes. So that can lead to variation. That is one of the reasons for variation. Second reason for variation is chance pairing of chromosomes during fertilization, because two chromosomes come from the two different parents, that is the male and the female. And the third reason for variation can be the mutation, that is error during DNA replication. These are the three main reasons which may cause variation, which causes differences, which produce differences in the characters of the young ones from their parents in case of sexual reproduction. But if we talk about asexual reproduction, there only one parent is involved. The variation is there, but that variation is not visible within one generation. It gets accumulated within several generations. So, how the variation can take place in asexual reproduction, where only one parent is involved? The reason for there is mutation, that is error in DNA replication. So, In case of asexual reproduction, there is one reason for the difference, and that is not visible within one generation. It gets accumulated within several generations, and then after a period of time, after several generations, we can see that variation has taken place. So, before starting how Mendel started his experiments to show how characters are inherited, how similarities are passed on from one generation to another generation, and how the differences arise, we should be knowing some of the terminologies which he used while doing his experiments. Now, what are those terminologies? Number one, these terminologies, some of the terminologies you must have already read about, but there are some new terms which you need to know when you will be studying about heredity and variation. Now, the first term which we need to know is chromosome. What are chromosomes? Chromosomes are the thread-like structures which are present in the cell, in the nucleus of the cell. These are the thread-like structures which are present in the nucleus of the cell, and they are made up of DNA. Chromosomes are made up of DNA which carry the gene. As I already told you, the study of the branch of biology which deals with the study of heredity and variation is called as genetics. Now, what is genetics? You can also say the study of genes is called as genetics. Now, what is this gene? These are the chromosomes, these are the thread-like structures which are present in the nucleus of the cells, and there are fixed number of chromosomes for every organism. If we talk about humans, we have 23 pair of chromosomes. Why do we call pair? Because all the cells, except for the sex cells, they show their function only in pairs. The sex cells, they are haploid in nature, but other cells, those are called as they have the chromosomes which are called as autosomes. They are diploid in nature. Diploid means they are two in number. They always work in pairs. Now, before starting, so chromosomes are thread-like structures which are present in the cell, in the nucleus of the cell, made up of DNA, and this DNA, it carries the gene. Now, what is a gene? What is a gene? Gene is called as the unit of DNA. Unit of DNA. Now, if we will see the microscopic structure of a chromosome, it has two arms. Those are called as the chromatids. These are called as the chromatids. Now, what do they have on these arms? These chromosomes, they have the units of DNA. Those are called as the genes. This is the gene. And now, what is the function of this gene? The gene, it is a unit of DNA which governs the synthesis of a particular protein. Which governs the synthesis of a particular protein that carry one character. Which governs the synthesis of a particular protein which is made up of one character. Now, this is a gene. Gene is a unit of DNA, and what is its function? It has the protein, it governs the synthesis of protein, which carries one character. So I repeat it, gene is a unit of DNA A gene is a unit of DNA which governs the synthesis of one protein that controls one specific character. Gene is a unit of DNA which governs the synthesis of one protein that carries one character. That controls a specific character. So, that is what is called as genetics. So, it controls a specific character. Remember this, there are always two genes for one character. One gene comes from the mother and another gene comes from the father for one character. What is a character? Any character. For example, if we talk about the character height, there will be two genes for the character height. Because as you know that gametes, they have only half the number of chromosomes. One gene for the character height will come from the mother and one gene for the character height will come from the father. And they will form a normal number of cells, normal number of chromosomes, that is 23 pair of chromosomes. 11 comes from the father and 11 comes from the mother, which makes, 23 pair of chromosomes, that means 46 chromosomes. 23 comes from the father and 23 comes from the mother, which makes 46 chromosomes. So, there are always two genes for a particular character, Now these genes, they are of two forms, dominant and recessive. What is a dominant gene and what is a recessive gene? As I already told you, there are two forms of genes. One comes from the father, one comes from the mother, and it makes a normal number of chromosomes, and we have always two genes for a particular character. Now these two genes, they can be either dominant or they can be either recessive. Now what is a dominant gene? If there are two genes for a character height, the one which get expressed in the young one in presence of an alternate gene for the same character is called as the dominant gene, and the one which does not get expressed in presence of an alternate gene for the same character is called as the recessive gene. What do you mean by that? If we have a young one who got the gene for height, that is tall gene, from the father and dwarf gene from the mother, but the young one is tall. So which is the dominant gene? The gene for tallness, because it got expressed in the young one. So the one which get expressed in the young one is called as the dominant gene. The one which does not get expressed in presence of an alternate gene for the same character is called as recessive gene. So what is a dominant gene? A dominant gene is the one which get expressed in the young one even in presence of an alternate gene for the same character. The gene which does not get expressed in presence of an alternate gene for the same character is the recessive one. So this is what is called as the dominant and the recessive. Now, there are two conditions, that is homozygous and heterozygous. What do you mean by homozygous? The homozygous condition means when there are two similar genes, that is either both of them are recessive or both of them are dominant, means they are in a homozygous condition. Both the genes are in the same form. That is the homozygous condition. What is a heterozygous condition? Heterozygous condition means when there are two alternate genes, that is either the dominant and the recessive. Dominant and the recessive. Two alternate genes for the same character. What is the character? I am giving you the example, that is character is height. If there are two alternate genes for the same character, so that is a heterozygous condition. If there are two similar genes for one character, that is a homozygous, means both the genes from mother as well as father, if they are both of them are tall, we are taking the character height, both of them are tall, this means they are in a homozygous condition. But if they are in a heterozygous condition, they will have one tall from the father and one dwarf from the mother, that is a heterozygous condition. So this is what is called as homozygous and heterozygous. Now, you have another term that is called as the phenotype and genotype. What do you mean by that? Phenotype and the genotype. What is a phenotype? Now we discussed that there are two genes for one character. What is a phenotype? The physical appearance of the young one is called its phenotype. The physical appearance of the young one is called its phenotype. What is a genotype? The genetic constitution of the young one. The genetic constitution of the young one is called its genotype. What do you mean by that? As I told you, if it is a heterozygous condition and the young one is tall, we don't know. We see the physical appearance, that we say that the phenotype, the physical appearance of the organism is that he is tall. But we need to know the genotype. What is the genotype? It can be either homozygous tall or heterozygous tall. Homozygous tall means that the young one has the same genes for the character. That is, he got both the from mother as well as father, he got the same gene, that is the gene for tallness. But if he is heterozygous tall, this means he is not pure tall. He has the gene for dwarfness also and he has the gene for tallness also. But the one which got expressed is called as the dominant gene, and the phenotype is that he is physically, we can see that he is tall, but he is, if we see the genotype, he is heterozygous tall. Means he has the genes for both the tallness and for the dwarfness. But the one which got expressed is the dominant gene. So this is what is called as the phenotype and the genotype. Now you have seen that there are two genes for one character. So there are thousands of, almost 30 to 40,000 genes are present in our chromosomes, which represent different characters. So, but these genes, they have their specific position on the chromosome. They have their specific locus on the chromosome, which is called as the gene locus. This is the position of the gene on the chromosome, and it is called as the gene locus. What is gene locus? The specific positions of the two genes which represent a particular character on the chromosome is called as the gene locus. Now, if we see, now you know that there is a specific position and there are two genes for one character, and what are those genes called as together? These are called as the alleles. What are these called as? Alleles. So, there are two alleles for one character. There are alleles for one character. So, what are alleles? Various forms of genes. Alleles are the various forms of gene which occur at the same gene locus on two chromosomes. Those are called as the alleles. So, various forms of genes which occur at the same gene locus. Gene locus means gene position, and they are called as the alleles. Got it? So, these are the alleles. Now, if you have the same alleles, those are called as the homozygous. If you have the alternate alleles, those are called as heterozygous. Now, genotype, phenotype, allele, gene locus. Now, what is F1 generation? F2 generation, now if we talk about F1 generation, what does F1 stand for? F1 stand for first filial generation. First filial generation or progeny. Filial means progeny or the young one which is produced. Now, I can explain you it in a simpler way. Parents, we have the parental generation, then children, then grandchildren. So, parental generation, children. This is the F1 generation, F1 progeny, grandchildren, F2 progeny, and it continues in the same way. Parental generation, children will be the F1 generation, and grandchildren will be the F2 generation. Now, these were the terms which were used by Mendel while doing his experiments. Now, what all we have studied? We have studied about heredity and variation and the various terminologies which we will be knowing, which I have already discussed, detailed you about these terminologies. These were the terminologies which Mendel used while doing his experiments. Now, it was Gregor John Mendel who worked on this. In our next class, we will be talking about the various mechanism of inheritance, how Mendel worked on that, what are the various different laws which he had shown, by which we can come to know how characters are inherited from one generation to another generation.